I still remember the way the dirt smelled that day. Damp, cold, and final. 30 years ago, I watched them lower my brother into the ground under a pale October sky. His name was David. He was 23. And when that coffin disappeared into the earth, it felt like the world itself went quiet. I built my life around that silence. I got married, had kids, moved away. But there's something about grief. It doesn't vanish. It just waits, buried beneath everything else, like roots under concrete. Then last week, it cracked open. It was 4:03 in the morning. The phone rang. That sound you know instantly doesn't belong at that hour. I thought maybe it was my son, maybe an accident. But when I picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't young or panicked. It was calm, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. He said 3 words, softly, like he was afraid to break something fragile. "It's me, David." For a second, I didn't breathe. The static hummed between us. I could hear wind, or maybe waves, behind his voice. I said his name out loud, like I needed to hear it to believe it. And he said, again almost whispering, "I need to see you, Tom." Then the line went dead. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't felt in decades. That grave in Maple Ridge Cemetery might not be holding who I thought it was. Grew up in a small town called Maple Ridge, tucked between the kind of rolling hills that never quite decide if they're mountains or memories. It was the kind of place where the air always smelled faintly of pine and engine oil, and where everyone knew what kind of cereal you bought before you did. David was 3 years older than me. He had this way of walking like he was late for something important, even when he wasn't. He used to say, "The world doesn't wait for anyone. Tommy, you either move or you fade." He was restless. I was careful. He burned bright. I stayed quiet. That's how it always was. Our parents ran a little hardware store on Main Street, one of those places that smelled of sawdust, rubber, and old receipts. Dad worked until his hands cracked, and Mom tried to keep the house warm with casseroles and forgiveness. When David was 17, he started hanging out with older guys, men who wore leather jackets and didn't talk much unless it was about cars or money. He'd come home smelling like gasoline and secrets. I remember the night he disappeared the first time. He was 21. He left a note. "Don't wait up. I need to figure things out." He was gone for almost a year. When he came back, he looked different. Thinner, eyes sharper, quieter. He didn't talk much about where he'd been, only that he owed people and that he was fixing it. 2 months later, the police came to our door. There'd been a fire, a car found off the old logging road. They said it was David's, burned so bad they used dental records to confirm. I remember Mom collapsing in the doorway, her hand clutching the frame like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Dad just stared, not at the officers, but past them, like he could still see David standing in the driveway, engine running, grinning. The funeral was closed casket. I remember the pastor talking about peace, about rest, about faith. But when they lowered that coffin, I couldn't stop staring at the photo they'd placed on top. David in his denim jacket, half smiling, as if even then he knew something we didn't. After that, everything just splintered. Mom faded into herself. Dad stopped talking about him altogether. And me, I carried him. In dreams, in the spaces between words, in every decision I made after. You learn to build a life around absence. You learn to stop asking questions, at least until 4:03 a.m. last week, when the dead decided to speak again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand, screen glowing against my palm. Outside, the world was perfectly still. That fragile kind of silence that only exists between midnight and dawn. Every sound felt sharper. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the house settling. Even my own breathing sounded like something Breaking. I replayed that voice again and again in my mind. It's me, David? It wasn't possible. I'd been at the funeral. I'd seen the ashes of that car. The twisted metal they said was his. I'd watched our mother lower her eyes to the ground and never raise them again. And yet, there was no mistaking it. The way he said my name, the way he paused before speaking, like he always used to when he wanted me to take him seriously. It was him, or someone who wanted me to think it was. The rational part of me, the adult, the father, the man with a mortgage and blood pressure medication, told me it was a cruel joke. Someone found an old voicemail, maybe a recording. People do worse things for attention. But there was something else, something quieter, something in my chest whispering, "What if?" I checked the call log. No number, just unknown. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I swore I'd never open again. Inside was a shoebox, taped shut and wrapped in an old t-shirt. It was full of the kind of things you keep when you can't let go. A faded Polaroid of us at the lake, fishing rods taller than we were, a lighter engraved with the initials DR, a folded letter I'd written him the week after he died. Never mailed, just sealed and hidden. And at the bottom, a photo I'd forgotten about. It was taken 2 weeks before the fire. David and I standing beside his old Chevy, the hood popped open, his arms slung around my shoulder. Behind us, the woods looked endless. I looked at his face, that same grin, that same spark, and it hit me how unfair time is, how easily it steals the sound of someone's laugh, the texture of their voice. But that call had brought it all back. At 6 a.m., I drove to my mother's house. She was still living in the same place, the white house with the cracked porch, the one David and I used to paint every summer. When she opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, like time had carved pieces away instead of adding them. "Tom," she said, rubbing her eyes, "it's barely morning." "I know, Mom," I said. I need to ask you something." She looked at me carefully. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, then said it. "I think someone's pretending to be David." Her face went blank. Not shocked, not confused, just hollow. She didn't move for a moment. Then she stepped aside and said quietly, "You'd better come in." The house smelled the same. Old coffee, cedar, and something faintly floral. I followed her to the kitchen. The morning light was coming in pale and gold, catching the dust in the air. She poured coffee, even though I hadn't asked. Then, as if the years had folded in on themselves, she said softly, "You're not the first one to get a call." I froze. "What do you mean?" She didn't look at me when she said it. "About a month ago. I thought it was a dream. But the voice—" Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. It said, "Hi, Mom." The cup rattled against the saucer. And for the first time in 30 years, I realized, whatever this was, it wasn't just me. That morning, I drove back to Maple Ridge Cemetery. The fog was still clinging to the ground, thick and milky, like the world hadn't woken up yet. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the same old oak tree where we'd stood 30 years ago, hands numb, hearts heavier than the dirt they shoveled. David's headstone was still there. The engraving had weathered, softened by decades of rain. David Reed, 1970, 1993. Beneath it, Mom's chosen words. Gone too soon, forever loved. I stood there longer than I should have. The fog curled around the stone, and I caught myself listening, for footsteps, for breathing, for a voice that shouldn't exist. It was quiet, but not peaceful. I knelt, brushing leaves from the dirt, and something caught my eye. A single white flower. Fresh. Still damp. Someone had been here recently. Mom hadn't left the house in weeks. Dad had been gone for years. That meant someone else. Someone who knew where he lay. or where he didn't. I felt the wind shift, that subtle, cold draft that moves through trees like a whisper. And for a moment, I could almost hear him. "You're late, Tommy." I turned, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just the creak of branches, the low hum of the morning. I drove into town after that, past the hardware store, now closed and boarded up, past the high school football field, where the paint on the bleachers had peeled to gray. Maple Ridge had grown quieter, emptier, as if the town itself had aged with us. I stopped at the Lantern Diner, a place David used to haunt after midnight. Same neon sign, same cracked red booths. Even the waitress looked familiar. Older, hair gray now, but still with that same habit of chewing gum between orders. She recognized me immediately. "Tom Reed. Haven't seen you since your dad's funeral," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, been a while." She poured me coffee before I even asked, like old habits never died. I asked her, casually at first, if she remembered David. Her hand froze mid-pour. "Course I do," she said slowly. "Hard to forget a kid like him." Then, quietly, like she was testing me, she added, "I heard he's back." I set the cup down. "What?" She leaned closer. "Guy came through a few nights ago. Sat right there in that booth. Looked just like him. Older, sure, but same face. Same eyes. Asked if anyone still remembered the Reeds." My chest tightened. "Did you talk to him?" "Not much. He didn't stay long. Paid cash. Drove off before I could ask more." I stared at the booth she pointed to, the one by the window, where the light broke across the glass in long, soft stripes. David used to sit there too, sketching on napkins, making lists of road trips he'd never take. It felt impossible, and yet too specific to ignore. Before leaving, I asked if she remembered what kind of car he drove. She frowned. "Old Chevy, blue one. Looked restored, like new." I walked out into the parking lot, heart pounding. David's car had been the same, a blue Chevy, except his was supposed to have burned to ash. That night, I booked a room at the Maple Ridge Motel, a place that smelled of cigarette smoke and rain-damp carpet. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. No new calls, no messages, but sleep wouldn't come. At 2:17 a.m., I heard it again. The faint vibration on the nightstand. Unknown number, my hand shook as I answered. "Hello?" Static, then faintly. "Tom," it was David's voice again. I felt my throat tighten. "Where are you?" I whispered. "Please, tell me where you are," the line crackled. I could hear breathing, soft, labored, like someone standing just beyond reach. "You shouldn't have come back." "David, just tell me." "They'll see you." Then the call cut out. I sat there in the dark, staring at the wall, pulse hammering in my ears. The next morning, I went back to the cemetery, but this time, someone had beaten me to it. The flower was gone, and in its place, wedged between the soil and the stone, was a scrap of folded paper. My hands trembled as I opened it. There were only 4 words, written in David's handwriting. Unmistakable, uneven, slanted right. "It wasn't me, Tom." The note changed everything. I read it at least a dozen times, running my thumb over the letters, half expecting the ink to smear like the years between us might finally give way. "It wasn't me, Tom." That night, I drove out to the old logging road, the one where they'd found David's car 30 years ago. It had been sealed off for years, swallowed by weeds and disuse. But I remembered the turn, the dip in the asphalt, the faint smell of pine that always clung to the air there. The police report had said the car had veered off the road, hit a tree, and exploded. No witnesses. No survivors. When I got there, the forest was darker than I remembered, the kind of darkness that seems to absorb sound. I parked the car, killed the lights, and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots, echoing far too loudly in the quiet. The trees were slick with mist. The air smelled faintly of rain and rust. I followed the bend of the road until I saw it. the charred stump, the one that had ended my brother's life, except it wasn't charred anymore. A new tree had grown up from the base, twisting around the old wound. Nature has a way of hiding its scars. I knelt down, tracing the bark, and that's when I saw the tire tracks. Fresh ones cutting through the mud, veering off exactly where David's car had gone off decades ago. Someone had been here. Recently. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and followed the tracks. They led into the woods, to a narrow clearing I didn't remember. And there, half hidden under a tarp and years of dust, was a car. A blue Chevy. David's car. The breath caught in my chest. I walked closer, hand shaking as I peeled the tarp away. The license plate, bent, rusted, was still legible. It was his. Inside, the seats were cracked with age, but everything else looked almost untouched. On the passenger seat, a photo sat under a layer of grime. The same one I'd found in my drawer, us, by the car. And then behind me, "You shouldn't have come here." The flashlight swung in my hand. A man was standing by the tree line, tall, gray at the temples. But the face, that face, I'd have known anywhere. I froze. The world seemed to shrink. Sound folding in on itself, my voice came out as a whisper. "David?" He didn't answer. Just stood there breathing hard, like each word would cost him too much. I took a step closer. "I buried you," I said, barely audible. "I saw the car. I saw—" He shook his head. "Wasn't me." The light caught his face then. Older, scarred along the jaw. Eyes that carried too many years. It was him. Older. But him. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "I don't understand," I said. "How—" He held up a hand, cutting me off. "You need to leave, Tom. You shouldn't have come back here." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't get to disappear and come back 30 years later with no explanation." He looked down, jaw clenched. "They were supposed to think I was dead. It was the only way." "Who?" He didn't answer. The wind moved through the trees, a hollow, uneasy sound. Then finally he looked up at me, eyes glistening. "I owed people. Dangerous people. They wanted what I couldn't give them. They said if I didn't disappear, they'd come for you. For Mom. So I burned the car. I made them believe it ended there." I felt my throat tighten. "You let us mourn you. For 30 years. "I had to," he said, voice cracking. "If they thought I was alive, you'd be dead by now." The words hung there, trembling in the dark between us. "Why now?" I asked. "Why call me?" He hesitated, looking toward the road. "Because they're gone now. All of them. I thought I could come home." He swallowed hard. "But when I did, someone followed me. Someone who still remembers." A branch cracked in the distance. He turned sharply toward the sound, eyes wide. "Get in your car," he said. "Now." "David." "Go, Tom." The headlights of another car appeared at the end of the road. Slow, deliberate, cutting through the fog. He turned back to me, and for one fractured second, it felt like we were kids again. Him shielding me from some unseen threat. He whispered, "Tell Mom I'm sorry." Then he ran, but into the trees, swallowed by darkness. I yelled his name until my voice broke, but he didn't turn back, and when I finally did, the other car was gone. Only silence remained. Heavy, cold, absolute. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car until the fog burned away and the horizon started to gray. The kind of color that doesn't belong to morning or night, just the space in between. I kept replaying everything he'd said. They would have come for you. For Mom. The words felt like frost. Cold. Delicate. Impossible to melt. When the sun finally rose, I drove straight to the sheriff's office. The same man had been there since my childhood. Sheriff Cole. Older now. Heavier. But still with that same slow, careful way of speaking. Like every word had to earn its place. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he just sat back and exhaled. "Tom," he said, "we found that car 30 years ago. The plates matched. The VIN matched. The dental records matched. You're telling me now that it wasn't your brother? I nodded. He's alive, Cole. I saw him. He studied me. That look people give when they're trying to decide if grief has finally cracked you open. Then, after a long pause, he said quietly, "There were things about that case that never sat right." He opened a drawer, shuffled through a few old folders, and pulled one out. Dusty, yellowed, marked Reed, David, 1993. Back then, he said, we didn't have the resources we do now. The fire was bad, worse than anything I'd seen. We identified the body using what was left of the jaw. But there was always one thing that bugged me. He flipped through the report until he found it. The body had a bullet lodged in the shoulder, a healed wound, weeks old. But your brother's medical records showed no such injury. I stared at the page. Then who was it? Cole sighed. We never knew. The face was gone, fingerprints burned. We assumed it was him because of the car. I felt something shift inside me and the ground of my memory cracking. What about the men he owed? I asked. Cole rubbed his temple. There were rumors back then. A smuggling ring operating out near the mill. Small stuff at first. Parts, tools, maybe guns. Your brother got mixed up with them. There was an accident one night. A man died. Some say David took the blame. Others say he disappeared before they could get to him. I felt my pulse in my throat. And they thought he died in that car. Cole nodded. If he's back, someone else might know too. I left the office feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The world outside looked the same. Same streets. Same rusted lampposts. But every shadow felt like a lie. I went to the only other person who might know the truth. Evelyn Carter. She'd been David's girlfriend back then. Quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of person who carried silence like armor. She still lived in the same house by the river, white paint flaking, a swing swaying gently in the wind. When she opened the door, it was like time hadn't touched her, only softened the edges. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Tom," she breathed, "you look just like him." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "He's alive." Her hand trembled on the door frame. "You've seen him?" I nodded. "Last night." She stepped back, motioning for me to come in. The house smelled like cedar and rain. Photos lined the walls, most of them black and white, moments frozen mid-laughter. She sat across from me, hands clasped tight. "I always hoped he was," she said softly. "He came to me once, a few years after the fire." My heart jumped. "He did?" She nodded. "He didn't stay long. Said he couldn't. He told me not to tell anyone. Said it wasn't safe. He looked different, tired, paranoid, but he was alive." "Did he say where he was going?" She hesitated. "No, only that he'd made a mistake trying to fix a mistake." I leaned forward. "What did he mean?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He said the man who died that night, the one in the car, wasn't supposed to be there. That he'd switched cars to throw them off, but someone else took his place." My breath caught. "So the man who died wasn't David," she whispered, "but someone who thought he was." The room went still. Outside, the river murmured softly against the rocks, the only sound between us. "He saved your family, Tom," she said. "He gave up everything so you could live." I sat there staring at my hands, at the faint tremor that had started in them. 30 years of grief, of guilt, of unanswered questions, all of it twisting into something heavier. "He called me," I said quietly. "He said someone followed him." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Then he's in danger again." I nodded slowly. "And so are we." Just then, a sound broke the stillness, a knock at the back door. 3 slow taps. Evelyn froze. "He used to knock like that," she whispered. I turned, heart pounding, and opened the door. There he was. David. Soaked from the rain, face drawn, eyes haunted, but alive, truly alive. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. When he looked at me, something in his face broke. Relief, sorrow, exhaustion all bleeding together. "Tom," he said, "it's over. They found me again." I shouldn't have called. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He looked at Evelyn, then back at me. I'm not running this time, he said. I can't, but I needed you to know the truth before it ends again. What truth? He swallowed hard. The man in that car wasn't random. He was one of them. He found out I was planning to disappear. He tried to stop me. We fought. The car caught fire. I didn't mean for him to die. He took a shaky breath. I buried the guilt, Tom. All these years, I tried to live with it. But you can't bury what still breathes inside you. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock. Then, headlights outside. A car slowing near the road. David turned toward the window, jaw tightening. It's them, he whispered. You have to go. But I didn't move. He looked at me, that same fierce, protective look from childhood. I saved you once, he said. Don't make me do it again. He opened the back door and stepped into the rain. Evelyn called after him, but he didn't turn. He disappeared into the night, the sound of the rain swallowing his footsteps. And that was the last time I saw my brother alive. They found him 2 days later. The rain had stopped by then, leaving the air heavy and clean, like the world was trying to rinse itself of what it had seen. Sheriff Cole called me early that morning, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Tom, he said, you should come down to the bridge. I knew before he even finished. When I got there, the road was closed off, lined with yellow tape that flapped gently in the wind. Beyond it, the water below churned dark and restless. They said they found his body caught between 2 rocks downstream, like he'd been trying to cross before the current took him. There was no sign of anyone else, no car, no evidence of another presence. Just David. Finally and truly, gone. I stood by the railing long after everyone else left. The deputies, the coroner, even Cole, just me, the river, and the wind threading through the trees. It didn't feel like 30 years had passed. It felt like I was back there again. 2 boys skipping stones in the same river, daring each other to jump from the rocks, believing the world was small enough to understand. I thought about everything he'd said, how he'd disappeared to protect us, how the guilt had eaten him alive, how even in hiding, he'd carried the weight of family like a secret he couldn't set down. For a long time, I wondered if I should tell Mom, if I should break what little piece she'd built out of the pieces left behind. In the end, I decided not to. She deserved her quiet, so I buried him again. This time, not as the ghost of my brother, but as the man he became, scarred, flawed, and still trying to do what was right, even if it meant being forgotten. The funeral was small. Just me, Sheriff Cole, and Evelyn. We didn't speak much. There wasn't anything left to say. When it was over, Evelyn handed me something. A small rusted lighter, initials carved into the side. Dr. Found it in his jacket, she said softly. He must have kept it all these years. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of it. The same lighter he used to flick open with a grin, lighting cheap cigarettes and telling me stories about how he'd change the world someday. That night, I sat on my porch and lit a candle with it. The flame caught instantly, steady, no flicker. I watched it burn for hours, the wax melting slow, the smoke curling into the dark. Grief changes shape over time. At first, it's sharp, all edges and noise. Then it becomes quieter, heavier, something that hums beneath everything you do. And if you live long enough, it softens into memory, not because it hurts less, but because you've learned to live with the missing pieces. Some nights, I still hear the phone ring in my dreams, still hear his voice, faint, distant, calling my name through static. It's me, David. And every time, I wake up expecting to feel that same panic, that same impossible hope, but instead, there's something gentler now, a kind of peace. I know he's gone, but I also know, wherever he ended up, whatever mistakes he carried with him, he finally found what he'd been running from all along. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just rest. Sometimes, I drive back to Maple Ridge. Not often, just when the seasons start to turn, when the air carries that faint scent of pine and rain. I stop by the river, the same spot where they found him, and I sit there until the sun starts to fall behind the trees. The water moves slow now, peaceful, almost kind. I think about how easily we believe the dead stay buried, how we tell ourselves stories to make the silence easier to live with. But grief doesn't end. It only changes its voice. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it calls at 4 in the morning, and sometimes it's just a flicker of light. Steady, quiet, eternal. If you ask me what I believe now, I'd tell you this. Some people leave so much of themselves behind that even time can't erase them. They stay in the echoes, in the dreams, in the smallest corners of our lives, not haunting us, reminding us, reminding us that love doesn't vanish when a heart stops beating. It lingers, patient, unseen, waiting for us to remember. And when I hear the wind move through the trees at night, soft and low like a voice on the line, I still say it back. I know, David. I remember. Then I close my eyes, and I let the silence answer.